Hello, everybody. My name is Graham Elwood, and you are watching The Political Vigilante. Well, we have been talking since day one of the COVID and specifically the CARES Act. We've talked about how $4.25 trillion was given to Wall Street and banks rather than the American people. We've also talked about how massive corporations like Walmart, like Amazon, have made record dollar amounts. I thought it was in the hundreds of billions of dollars, which is pretty offensive. Turns out Time Magazine has an even bigger number. The top 1% of Americans have taken 50 trillion from the bottom 90%, and that's made the U.S. less secure. Like many of the virus hardest hit victims, the United States went into the COVID-19 pandemic racked with pre-existing conditions, something I talked about numerous times on this show. 60% of Americans didn't have money for a $500 to $1,000 emergency. This was in January and February. 30,000 people were dying before COVID-19 because they didn't have health insurance. The number one cause of bankruptcy was healthcare, health bills, medical costs. The number one cause of bankruptcy before COVID-19. We had several million car loans that were 90 days late or more in February. We had a housing bubble. We had all of these things. COVID has just made it worse. A fraying public health infrastructure, inadequate medical supplies, an employer-based health insurance system perversely unsuited to the moment. These and other afflictions are surely contributing to the death toll. $50 trillion. This is how much the upward redistribution of income has cost American workers over the past several decades. So this is over several decades, which means the last 6 months, they've gotten somewhere in the neighborhood of $450 billion just in the last 6 months. Almost $500 billion just in the last 6 months. But what this article is pointing out, and wow, Time Magazine, which is their Time Warner, I mean, they're one of the big five. According to a groundbreaking new working paper by Carter C. Price and Catherine Edwards of the Rand Corporation, had more equitable distributions of the 3 decades following World War II, 45 to 74, merely held steady, the aggregate annual income of Americans earning below the 90th percentile would have been 2.5 trillion higher in the year 2018 alone. $50 trillion is how much upward redistribution of income has cost American workers over the past several decades. And what this survey and everything goes into is a thing we've talked about on the show of how CEOs keep making record profits, their salaries keep going up, but the average workers isn't. If minimum wage had progressed evenly along with the 1%'s wages and income and everything, it would be about $24 an hour would be minimum wage in this country, which would actually make our economy better because more people would have more money. It's insane. Going back to the $2.5 trillion, that is an amount equal to nearly 12% of the GDP, enough to more than double median income. Enough to pay every single working American in the bottom 9 deciles an additional $1,144 a month, every single year. Gee, if you're just barely getting by, I wonder if that would help. You're making 25, 30 grand a year. What would an extra $12,000 a year do for you and your family's life? What would it do for the economy? Price and Edwards calculate that the cumulative tab for our 4-decade-long experiment in radical inequity had grown to over $47 trillion from 75 to 2018, a recent pace of about $2.5 trillion a year. That number we estimate Cross the 50 trillion mark by early 2020. That's 50 trillion that would have gone into the paychecks of working Americans had inequality held constant. Not taking away from the rich, just keeping it the way it was post World War II. Just keeping it there. CEOs, the 1% made plenty of money in those decades. They weren't hurting. Made plenty of money. What would America look like today in the middle of this pandemic if this $50 trillion had been distributed throughout workers and stuff like that? We'd have better healthcare. We wouldn't have 28 million evictions happening. We'd have more people with savings and retirement and owning property, and more money would have been handed down generation to generation. $50 trillion that would have built a far larger and more prosperous economy. $50 trillion that would have enabled the vast majority of Americans to enter this pandemic far more healthy, resilient, and financially secure. Rather than 60% of the population couldn't handle a $500 to $1,000 emergency, let me tell you something. COVID is way more than a $1,000 emergency. People would have had savings, would have had other sources of income, would have had all of these things. And the RAND report, whose research was funded by the Fair Work Center, which co-author David Wolf is a board member of, demonstrates the rising tide most definitely did not lift all boats. It didn't even lift most of them. Nearly all of the benefits and growth these past 45 years were captured by those at the very top. And as American economy grows radically unequal, it is holding back economic growth itself. So all these white nationalist Second Amendment people that are just, I got to go protect my property and all this. Where were you when the banks were stealing people's homes 10 years ago? And why don't you stop blaming minorities and immigrants and anybody that's different than you and blame the 1%? They're the ones that were doing it. You think the rioting and looting is what? There's an economic component behind that. Very much so. People are fed up. They're pissed off. They have had everything taken away from them. And working class white people are in this group as well. And rather than realize who's sticking it to them, you rally behind Donald Trump, who's part of the 1%, who hasn't done dick for you and won't. He gave a $1.5 trillion tax break to his billionaire buddies. Trump is an awful piece of shit. Just like the Clintons, just like Obama, just like Biden, all of them. They're horrible people. They're just bad, awful, greedy people. Trump is just more overt about it. He said he was going to pull us out of all these countries. He didn't. He said he was going to end all these wars. He was very critical of Obama on that front. That was one of the platforms he ran on. He ran on an anti-interventionist campaign. He keeps bombing everybody. He said he was going to pull troops out of Syria. Nah, not really. Kept him there to guard the oil. The low-wage workers and their families, disproportionately people of color, suffer from far higher rates of asthma, hypertension, diabetes, and other COVID-19. Yet they are also far less likely to have health insurance and far more likely, you should be picking up and storming the courthouse for health insurance, not so you can get a haircut. You shouldn't show up to a gun at a Black Lives Matter protest. You should join in solidarity with them because they're getting screwed over, and so are you. It's no surprise then, according to the CDC, that COVID-19 inflicts a disproportionate burden of illness and death among racial and ethnic minority groups. But imagine how safer, healthier, and empowered all American workers might be if $50 trillion had been paid out in wages instead of being funneled in the corporate profits and the offshore accounts of the super rich. That's what you should be protesting. That's what you should be getting mad at, because that's who's going to come take your home. It's not going to be a looting riot, Black Lives Matter protest. It's going to be the banks. They're the ones who took the 10, I don't know what the number is, somewhere between 6 and 8 million homes 10 years ago. It wasn't Black Lives Matter. Don't settle down. scared white America. They didn't steal your home. Immigrants, Latino immigrants didn't steal your home. Syrian refugees didn't steal your home. Goldman Sachs stole your home. Citibank stole your home. One West Bank, headed by Steve Mnuchin at the time, stole your home. And the Democrats and the Republicans worked together to let these things happen. I mean, look at this photo of people waiting outside in Kentucky to find assistance with their unemployment claims in Kentucky, June 18th. Look at that line. From 47 to 74, real incomes grew close to the rate of per capita economic growth across all income levels. That means that for 3 decades, those at the bottom and middle of the distribution saw their incomes grow at about the same rate as those at the top. That was America, post-World War II. This is the big boom. This is why America is so wonderful. It had also the thing that the Republican people always seem to forget, and Democrats are too dumb to care about it. But in this era, these 3 decades where everything was growing equally, highest union membership, highest tax rate for the wealthy 1%, highest amount of banking regulation. So when they say, deregulation, that's what we need. No, deregulation only helps the 1%. Regulations are to protect all of us, the 99%. Deregulation only benefits the ruling class. This was an era in which America built the world's largest and most prosperous middle class. An era in which inequality between income groups steadily shrank, even as shocking inequities between the sexes and races largely remained. But around 1975, the extraordinary era of broadly shared prosperity came to an end. One of the things that contributed to it, that's right around the time when Nixon took us off the gold standard, turned our currency into fiat currency, meaning it's just worth nothing. It's based in nothing. When we were on the gold standard, you literally, a $20 bill was a $20 gold note. It literally used to say that on the currency. So let's say I'm just picking round numbers. Let's say we had, $1 trillion in actual physical bills. It's because we had $1 trillion in gold and we didn't print any more bills than we had bars of gold. Nixon got rid of that. Now we just print money willy-nilly and the dollar is going to be worth nothing in the next year or so. I would suggest getting a little more knowledgeable about cryptocurrency. I've started to get more knowledgeable about it. I'm knowledgeable about MMT. I have an old MMT playlist. And I'm starting to put some of my money in crypto. Just something to think about. This isn't an investment channel. I'm just telling you, that's what I'm seeing. That's what I'm doing. You're free to do what you like. Since then, the wealthiest Americans, particularly those in the top 1% and 0.1%, have managed to capture an even larger share of our nation's economic growth. In fact, almost all of it. Their real incomes skyrocketing, at the vast majority of Americans saw little, if any, gains. Look at this. Income distribution for all adults. Unbelievable. The median individual income of $36,000, workers are being shortchanged by $21,000 a year, $28,000 when using the CPI, an amount equivalent to an additional $10 to $13 an hour. So this is what I'm talking about. Imagine you're making 36 grand a year now, but actually you're making $57,000 more a year. That extra 20 grand is huge. And the 1% doesn't need it. They already have mansions and private jets and limousines and polo horses and all that other bullshit. But they just want a little more. They want 2 polo horses. They want 3 private jets. They want a bigger this and a bigger that and another yacht. Betsy DeVos, 10 yachts. She has 10 yachts. Extreme inequality is costing the medium income full-time worker about $42,000 a year. you could be making somewhere between $20,000 to $40,000 a year more than you're already making if the 1% actually gave a damn, which they don't. The 1%, we're in class warfare. That's the ones you should be angry at. Not Antifa, not the 1%. The 1% controls Trump and the Republican Party. They control Biden and the Democratic Party. Trump and the Clintons are all friends. Wake up. I mean, this article just basically goes on and on. There's the distribution of taxable income. The U.S. workforce is now better educated and more urban than it was in 1975. And also far less white and male, with white men falling from over 60% of prime age workforce in 74 to less than 45% in 2018. These changes are important because while there are far more equality between the income distribution in 75, there was also more inequity within them, notably with regards to gender and race. For example, the median income of white women in 1975 was only 31% of that of white men. By 2018, white women were earning 68% as much. Likewise, the median income of black men as a share of their white counterparts' earnings rose from 74% in 1975 to 80% in 2018. Clearly, income disparities between races and especially between men and women have narrowed since 75, and that's a good thing. But unfortunately, much of that narrowing we see is more an artifact of 4 decades of flat or declining wages for low and middle-income white men than it is of substantial gains for women and non-whites. So let's make that really clear. When the corporate media, and I'm shocked Time is actually putting this in here, says, oh, the disparities between non-whites and women is better. Okay, that's good. That's good. But let's look at what's really causing it. That's what this article is talking about. So the high tide of the 1% has not lifted all boats. It has not lifted any of our boats. It has only lifted their yachts. Only lifted their yachts. So it's a very let me read this. Single largest driver of rising inequality these past 40 years has been a dramatic rise in inequality between white men. The data on income distribution by educational attainment is equally revealing, in that it calls the lie of the notion of a skills gap a dominant narrative that has been argued that rising inequality is largely a consequence of a majority of American workers failing to acquire the higher skills necessary to compete in our modern global economy. If workers were better educated, this narrative argues, they would earn more money. Problem solved. Indeed, at every income distribution, the education premium has increased since 1975, with the income of college graduates rising faster than their less educated counterparts. But this growing gap is more a consequence of falling incomes for workers without a college degree than it is of rising real incomes for most workers with one. So that this is fascinating, the study, because it's picking out all these sort of propaganda narratives that we kind of hear, which again, even if that narrative was true, like, oh, there's this, the American workers needs to get more educated and more skilled. Well, then why don't we have free college there? But it's interesting that it's more ruling class propaganda that's put out there. The median income for full-time workers with a 4-year degree has grown from $55,000 a year in 75 to $72,000 in 2018. But that still falls short of the $120,000 they'd be earning had incomes grown per capita with the GDP. Even at the 90th percentile, a college-educated full-time worker making $191,000 a year is earning less than the 78% what they would have had inequity held constant. The reality is American workers have never been more highly educated. In 1975, only 67% of the adult U.S. workforce had a high school education or better, while just 15% had earned a 4-year college. This statistic, this information is startling to me, and it just shows you more bullshit that the 1% puts out there. Oh, it's your fault. You don't go to college. You didn't work hard enough. You didn't pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Should join the military and get free college. Then you can earn more. No. They've been screwing us over. More people are educated, more, all this stuff, more technical skills, more all of it. But they're still getting screwed because the 1% is just never happy and they have to they take everything. By 2018, 91% of adult workers had completed high school, while the percentage of college graduates in the workforce had more than doubled to 34%. In raw numbers, the population of adult workers with high school education or less has fallen since 1975, while the number of workers with a 4-year degree has more than quadrupled. It's in the show notes. It's fascinating to read, and it just shows you how I'm done with the ruling class 1%. You have companies like Amazon that make billions of dollars in profit before the pandemic. Since the pandemic, they've even doubled or tripled their profits. And they pay $0 in taxes. And they can't. Jeff Bezos fires Chris Smalls for organizing a strike. It's pretty sad. It's pretty disgusting. So I'm glad Time Magazine put this out. I don't know that this is going to be picked up by Rachel Maddow and Anderson Cooper in that crowd. Definitely won't get picked up by Fox. And if they do, what will they pick out of it? Will they call out those networks that I just listed, all of them, Fox, CNN, MSNBC, all of them, ABC, whatever? Because they can't call it out because they're owned by these billionaires that have just profited off the labor of American workers. So they won't call it out. I don't get paid by those jags. So that's why I'm calling it out. Shave your knuckles for justice.